Starting with the big story, US President Donald Trump has built an image of a president who is driven by results. He's unconventional to say the least, so it was not really surprising when Trump agreed to meet North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. The meeting is supposed to happen on June 12th in Singapore. But will it happen at all is the big question. Remember, Trump had once said Kim Jong-un is a smart cookie. As it turns out, Kim Jong-un is now testing the patience of the US president, complicating the matters further is the role of the Chinese, the most powerful backers of the reclusive North Korean regime. Can China, the US and North Korea make peace? That's the biggest story of the day. And before our guests analyze it for you, here's what the US President Donald Trump and South Korean President Moon Jae-in said at the White House yesterday.
We are working on something, and, there's a chance that it'll work out. There's a very substantial chance that it won't work out. I don't want to waste a lot of time, and I'm sure he doesn't want to waste a lot of time. So there's a very substantial chance that it won't work out, and that's okay. That doesn't mean it won't work out over a period of time, but it may not work out for June 12th. But there's a good chance that we'll have the meeting. A little disappointed because when Kim Jong-un had the meeting with President Xi in China, the second meeting, the first meeting we knew about, the second meeting, I think there was a little change in attitude from Kim Jong-un. So I don't like that. I don't like that. I don't like it from the standpoint of China. Now, I hope that's not true. President Xi is a world-class poker player. And I'd probably maybe doing the same thing that he would do. But I will say this, there was a somewhat different attitude after that meeting, and I'm a little surprised. Now, maybe nothing happened. I'm not blaming anybody, but I'm just saying maybe nothing happened and maybe it did. But there was a different attitude by the North Korean folks when after that meeting. So I don't think it was a great meeting. Nobody knew about the meeting. And all of a sudden, it was reported that he was in China a second time. The first time everybody knew about. The second time it was like a surprise. And I think things changed after that meeting. So I can't say that I'm happy.
And I have every confidence that President Trump will be able to achieve a historic feat of making the upcoming US-North Korea summit successful and end the Korean War that had been lasting for the past 65 years. And also, along the way, achieve complete denuclearization of North Korea, establish a permanent peace regime on the Korean Peninsula, and also normalize relations between the United States and North Korea. I have every confidence that he will be able to make a historic turnaround in this sense, and I will spare no effort to provide all necessary support.
And we'll be analyzing the recent developments, and to add more perspective to our discussion is Ainar Tangen, political and economic commentator from Beijing. Also joining in is Vishnu Prakash, former ambassador to Seoul and official spokesperson of the MEA. And I'm also joined in by Ramesh Ramachandran, our senior correspondent, who's joining us live from the newsroom. Let me quickly start off with Ainar. Let me quickly go across to Ainar. Ainar, China, we just heard what President Donald Trump had to say. He has gone on to say that President Xi Jinping is a world-class poker player and that Kim's change in stance is being attributed to China's role at the moment. How do you analyze this entire situation, and what kind of a role do you see China playing?
Well, I think Donald Trump is flailing a little bit. When Bolton came out and started mentioning Libya as the kind of model for dealing with North Korea, that set off alarm bells in the DPRK. Pyongyang was not happy about that. They made some very pointed statements, not only about what was said, but also about John Bolton. So this is a situation where Donald Trump is trying to make the best of what is turning out to be a bad situation. There was always a little bit of a disconnect between what America wanted in terms of a denuclearization within 6 months to a year maximum versus North Korea, who said denuclearization, but maybe it will take 5, 10, 15 years.
Right. And also, what are the possible returns that China is looking to have out of this entire summit between the United States and North Korea?
Well, it's become complicated because of the trade war, the tariffs that were almost settled. Now it seems like Donald Trump is backpedaling. He said there is no deal and things like that. So there is a mixture of economic and security issues on the table. This is the way that Donald Trump promised he would conduct American business, and he's being true to his word. So at this point, it's very hard to say. I mean, China is very committed to having a denuclearized North Korea. The last thing they want is a nuclear arms race in all of these Asian countries, especially with heightened tensions in the South and East China Seas. This is not something that they're looking for. So obviously their long-term interests are seeing this go through. I think they're trying to be sincere, but it's very, very difficult to know exactly what Donald Trump wants. He's not able to, he can establish goals, but he doesn't really have means and methods. It's kind of like get rid of $200 million, $1 billion worth of exports to us. Those are things that consumers in the U.S. buy. You can't really stop people from doing it. And this is the same thing with the nuclear deal with North Korea. He's not willing to bend. He's painted himself into a corner by saying he's going to be tough, and he expects them to completely denuclearize and before he starts doing anything in terms of giving them a carrot.
Right. Also, Anna, you know, the U.S. and China relations have been tested lately. Also, you know, it is the trade war, which, as you rightly mentioned, almost seemed to have ended, but it's still on. What do you think is the role of the trade war at the moment in terms of China's role? Is it playing a counsel to North Korea, and will the trade war affect the entire narrative?
I think it's always going to be on the periphery. As soon as Donald Trump makes it part of that, everyone starts thinking about it. I think Beijing was trying to have containment on these different issues. But obviously, you know, if in the mind of the person you're dealing with, if these things are connected, there's really not much you can do. You're going to have to deal with the situation as it is. It's unfortunate. I mean, markets were just recovering, and now there's a lot more uncertainty. This seems to be a big factor in what Donald Trump does. He creates uncertainty. He says it's for a negotiating position. But in business and also in diplomacy, this kind of thing can backfire.
All right. And I'm also joined in by Vishnu Prakash, former ambassador to Seoul and official spokesperson for the MEA from New Delhi. Let's quickly go across to Ambassador Prakash. Ambassador, you know, the North Korea has also invited journalists from Russia, US, UK and South Korea to witness the closure of their nuclear facilities. Why is the US not acknowledging North Korea's dismantling efforts?
Well, I'm afraid the American side is unilaterally upping the demands. Let me take you back to 26th of March in Beijing, where the terms were set by Kim Jong-un. And I think these were reasonable terms. What he said is that he seeks peace in the Korean Peninsula, and the onus is on USA and South Korea to create the atmosphere of peace. And he's willing to take steps, gradual steps, incremental steps towards achieving peace. On the other hand, USA has unilaterally been prescriptive, and unilaterally said they want X, Y, and Z. It's almost as if USA wants to be the complainant, the prosecutor, the judge, and the jury. I'm afraid it does not work like that. Kim Jong-un has genuine, he's insecure. The North Korean regime is vulnerable, it's paranoid, and it knows what has happened in the past to countries which has rapidly denuclearized. He is not going to give up the biggest trump card that he has, that's weapons of mass destruction, which has two purposes. One, it's seen as regime security. Two, regime insurance. And two, a deterrent against a possible US-led attack. Now, if he gives that away, and they have spent decades in perfecting their, or kind of advancing their WMD program, then he's exposed, he's vulnerable. And why will he give it up for some economic inducements which may or may not happen when even the regime's existence is in doubt? So I'm afraid the prescriptive approach of the US side this time has been the cause. And certainly the resumption of the joint U.S.-South Korea military exercises, public criticism by the U.S. of North Korean human rights record, and then Mr. John Bolton, who always likes to shoot from the hip, has complicated matters. I would think that the ball is squarely in the U.S. court. They need to decide. They need to decide how to play it. They cannot just demand compliance from North Korea. North Korea wants to be treated with respect and as an equal. And if that happens, then I guess the deal will, the summit will go through. If there is going to be one-sided demand and it's either my way or highway, then things could be different.
Mr. Prakash, you mentioned John Bolton, U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton's comments on the Libyan model. Could they have deepened North Korea's, already considerable nervousness about denuclearization?
Well, it was QED. It was reinforcement of the North Korean conviction that the U.S. regime was out to get him. Likes of John Bolton or the neocons and the hawks in the U.S. have never hidden their preference for a regime change in the U.S. in North Korea, and also the fact that USA unilaterally pulled out of JCPOA. It was a very good deal, a very important deal, which was signed between number of countries, the P5 countries plus Germany on one hand and Iran on the other. Now that shows that no agreement is sacrosanct. If it is convenient today for me, I go ahead with that. If it's not convenient today for me, I do not go ahead with that. I'm afraid this is a very unique way of conducting international diplomacy, because diplomacy depends on confidence, trust with each other. And frankly, there is complete deficit of trust between North Korea and the U.S. in particular. And I must also add that North Korea trusts nobody, least of all the U.S. And it does not trust U.S., does not trust China. It only trusts itself. It knows that when push comes to shove, it has to depend on its own resources, and hence the the missile and nuclear deterrent. They will do anything short of CVID. Give me a second, please. They'll do anything short of CVID. They will agree on IAEA safeguards, freeze, etc. But a complete denuclearization is a no-no. Right.
A complete denuclearization is a no-no. Let me also, on that point, involve Ramesh Ramachandran, who's also joining us from the newsroom. Ramesh, we just heard Ambassador Prakash say that a complete denuclearization for North Korea is a no-no, and it's very integral to establish how, North Korea has been repeatedly emphasizing on not having a unilateral disarmament, but it should be a mutual one.
Indeed, Akanksha, listening to Einar Tangen and Ambassador Prakash, I'm struck by a couple of points, Akanksha. Number one, the 12th June Singapore summit may happen, it may not happen. But knowing Trump, when he says it may be delayed, a good chance that it will indeed be delayed. It could take place at a later date, number one. Number two, after pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal, Trump has raised the stakes for himself with the Singapore summit. And to my mind, a no summit for Trump is better than a failed summit. So he does not want a summit that might not go down well with his constituents. So to my mind, he would much rather wait and watch than plunge headlong into a summit without homework or without preparation. Number two. Number three, Trump has a tendency of assuming maximalist positions. Now, in diplomacy, negotiations, there's some element of give and take, some element of accommodation, which I do not see happening with the Trump administration. I'll tell you why. If you go back to a sequence of events over the last couple of months, Akanksha, Kim Jong-un has undertaken a series of measures. One, he suspended all nuclear and missile tests, number one. Number two, he agreed to end the war with South Korea. Number three, he agreed to reduce hostilities at the demilitarized zone separating the north from the south. He agreed to dismantle the Punggye-ri testing site, which is happening as we speak in a couple of days from now. Also, he agreed to release U.S. prisoners. And last but not the least, he spoke about global disarmament and a global test ban. In return, what did Trump say or do? He says we will continue to apply maximum pressure on North Korea, number one. And number two, he insists on complete, verifiable and irreversible denuclearization. Now that, to my mind, as Ambassador Prakash mentioned, is most unlikely. You tell me one country which has given up its nuclear weapons yet in history. None. Do you think North Korea will become the first to do so? I doubt it.
Right. Also, Ramesh, is it also because U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton insisted that the regime hand over all its nuclear weapons and production equipment before receiving any benefits?
Absolutely. As the two guests mentioned there, Akanksha, the problem may lie with Trump himself, his personality, his administration, including John Bolton and Mike Pompeo. The question is, this is the nub of the matter, Akanksha. Will Trump agree to give security guarantees to ensure that the Kim regime survives the day and the day after? He says he will. Yesterday he said that in so many words with President Moon Jae-in in the White House. But knowing Kim Jong-un and knowing Trump, Kim Jong-un might have difficulties in trusting the Trump administration, number one. Number two, will Trump revisit the U.S.-South Korea treaty alliance? Remember, South Korea enjoys the benefit of the American nuclear umbrella, but South Korea and the U.S. want North Korea to give up its nuclear weapons. Number three, will the U.S. remove troops from the Korean Peninsula? That's a big issue.
Right.
Will the U.S. end military drills? That again is a moot point.
Right. I'm also joined in by former ambassador to Seoul and official spokesperson of MEA. For Ambassador Prakash, let me also go across to Ambassador. He wants to join in on this point. Ambassador, we just heard Ramesh mention that, you know, the ball is entirely in US's court. Do you actually agree? Because there are a host of measures that North Korea is actually taking at the moment.
I would completely agree with Ramesh Ramachandran. What he has said is spot on. There are two bits that I want to add. One, this time around, as I see it, Kim Jong-un has acted in good faith so far. I'm not saying he will always do that, but what I'm saying is that so far, since January 1, 2018, Kim Jong-un has kept up his part of the bargain. Secondly, Ramesh made a very valid point about giving security guarantees. The question is, what kind of security guarantees can convince North Korea that it is safe? And who will give the security guarantees? USA? He doesn't trust USA. And USA can change its mind anytime. So the only security guarantees that he will trust is his own nuclear and missile assets. And that's where the rub lies, because the security guarantees and the denuclearization go hand in hand. And this will take years to build mutual trust. And only when mutual trust is there, which could take years, can something move forward. In the meantime, it has to be a gradual progress process of rapprochement. And, to expect an overnight change, I think is absolutely unrealistic. It may not work. It will not work.
Right.
And this public shadow boxing. I mean, so far as when in 2017 the two sides were still glaring at each other, all right, rhetoric was fine, bellicosity is fine.
Right.
But once you decide the process of dialogue, then you have to switch to quiet diplomacy, not publicly fling one demand after the other at each other. And that is, again, as I said, this time it is more from the US side than from the North Korean side.
Right. So, Ambassador Prakash saying that this time it's more from the US side. On that note, let me also go back to Einar, who's also joining us on this discussion. Einar, you know, it is indeed a sweeping comment coming in from US President Donald Trump when he says that Xi Jinping is a world-class poker player. Now, do you think that could derail the ongoing efforts between US and China?
Well, actually, I think he's just trying to find a scapegoat in case there is no meeting. He can point to a third party. But I would like to go back to something Ramesh and the ambassador said. First off, I think we all agree that the U.S. is being unreasonable. But, understand that Trump and the rest of the Congress is battling a perception that the U.S. has been played before in the past, first by Ng's grandfather and then by his father. So there's this very difficult situation where the American public will not tolerate a situation in which they do not see concrete results before any kind of aid is given. And this is one thing that is not Trump's making. He's making it worse by the kind of bellicose rhetoric and also the choice of his advisors. The other thing is, yes, they are destroying their nuclear facility. I think that's wonderful, except it didn't work anymore. The last nuclear test, in essence, collapsed the tunnels. It is now no longer operational. Now, if they wanted to do more tests, they would have to find a new location. And this brings back the specter of when the North Koreans destroyed a cooling tower. Once again, that cooling tower was non-operational. So there's this feeling that of deja vu among some of the people at the State Department saying, look, we're not going to be played again. And this is the difficulty. In terms of solving this, I agree. The U.S. will not be able to offer legitimate, believable security guarantees. I think that would have to be either from Russia or China. And I don't think Russia, at this point, is in a mind to help out Donald Trump or the U.S. With its problems. That leaves China. If China were to enter into a three-party deal where they guaranteed this, the safety of Kim Jong-un and his particular government, I think that would perhaps be the only way out short of an armed confrontation, which is what Bolton and his crew would like to have.
Right. Very valid points made out by you, Einar. And of course, the choice of advisors and the kind of rhetoric that President Donald Trump is choosing is going to make a lot of difference. Trump and South Korean President Moon Jae-in were at the White House, and let's listen into what both had to say yesterday.
We are working on something, and, there's a chance that it'll work out. There's a very substantial chance that it won't work out. I don't want to waste a lot of time, and I'm sure he doesn't want to waste a lot of time. So there's a very substantial chance that it won't work out, and that's okay. That doesn't mean it won't work out over a period of time, but it may not work out for June 12th. But there's a good chance that we'll have the meeting. A little disappointed because when Kim Jong-un had the meeting with President Xi in China, the second meeting, the first meeting we knew about, the second meeting, I think there was a little change in attitude from Kim Jong-un. So I don't like that. I don't like that. I don't like it from the standpoint of China. Now, I hope that's not true. President Xi is a world-class poker player. And I'd probably maybe doing the same thing that he would do. But I will say this, there was a somewhat different attitude after that meeting, and I'm a little surprised. Now, maybe nothing happened. I'm not blaming anybody, but I'm just saying maybe nothing happened and maybe it did. But there was a different attitude by the North Korean folks when after that meeting. So I don't think it was a great meeting. Nobody knew about the meeting, and all of a sudden it was reported that he was in China a second time. The first time everybody knew about, the second time it was like a surprise. And I think things changed after that meeting. So I can't say that I'm happy.
And I have every confidence that President Trump will be able to achieve a historic feat of making the upcoming US-North Korea summit successful and end the Korean War that had been lasting for the past 65 years. And also, along the way, achieve complete denuclearization of North Korea, establish a permanent peace regime on the Korean Peninsula, and also normalize relations between the United States and North Korea. I have every confidence that he will be able to make a historic turnaround in this sense, and I will spare no effort to provide all necessary support.
All right, we are running short of time at the moment, but before I go, let me quickly go back to our guests. Ramesh, on a last note, how would you sum up what are the expectations and what are the returns that North Korea can look at?
Just 4 quick points, Akanksha. Number 1, Trump must tone down the rhetoric, number 1. Number 2, when he says there are certain conditions we want, to my mind, that is a deal breaker. North Korea has consistently said, it was articulated by the North Korean ambassador to WION in June last year, that North Korea is okay with a moratorium, number 1. North Korea will talk only to the US, and 3, without preconditions. So the moment you use the word conditions, to my mind, that's a deal breaker. Number 3, Trump wants everything done yesterday. Now, he says he wants an all-in-one approach as opposed to an incremental progress on the contentious issues. He needs to resolve that. And 4th, there is no denying that the road to peace in the Korean Peninsula passes through Beijing, whether Trump likes it or not.
Right. Let me also go back to Ambassador Prakash, who's also joining us. Ambassador, what are the returns that North Korea could look at the moment?
Well, North Korea certainly wants détente, as I see it. He wants a rapprochement. He wants economic development, and that is the twin policy that Kim Jong-un has followed ever since he assumed office. But his primary focus at that time was to develop a deterrent. Now, the big difference between previous times and this time is that now, for the first time, North Korea has a credible deterrent that it can rely on, which was the quest earlier. So that is the game changer from North Korean perspective, and they are willing to shift gears. Secondly, I do not agree with my colleague in Beijing that North Korea will rely on Chinese guarantees. North Korea has been traditionally very independent. They do not want to be beholden to anybody. And they do not, frankly, trust either China or USSR, right, and Russia. Although certainly they trust China and Russia much more than USA. And so that's why I think that there will be 2 deal breakers. One will be the definition of denuclearization, and secondly, the kind of security guarantee that North Korea will accept. But the summit may happen, may not happen. But I guess this time there has been more bona fides on the part of North Korea.
More bona fides on the part of North Korea. Aina, what do you have to say to that? Ambassador Prakash just said that he begs to differ and that, they are not looking at a Chinese guarantee is what they are saying. What is the interest that China has at the moment?
Well, I agree with the ambassador. There's no love lost between the DPRK and China. I was just pointing out that in a scenario where there are very few solutions, this is possibly one of them. As he said himself, they do not trust the U.S. They're probably least trust in the U.S. Possible. In terms of going forward, though, I don't know that even if there is a meeting that you can get beyond the personality and advisors of Donald Trump. The rhetoric will not stop. We know that. We've seen that over the last year and so ever since the campaign trail. So, quite frankly, it's just a mismatch. You have a person who is at an apex in history where he's not able to carry the ball on trade issues and political.
Right. Thank you, Einar, for joining us. Also, Ambassador Prakash and Ramesh Ramachandran, who's joining us live from the newsroom. Thank you so much for joining us on this discussion.